I went on a 2-week vacation thinking my home would be safe and peaceful. I never imagined coming back to discover that my HOA had entered my yard while I was gone, unannounced, unauthorized, and acting like it was completely normal. What they did next wasn't just shocking, it was outrageous, and it left the entire neighborhood talking. How far would an HOA go when they think they can overstep the law? You won't believe what happened the moment I uncovered the truth. Life in my quiet suburban neighborhood had always felt normal. Nestled among tree-lined streets and manicured lawns. Our little cul-de-sac was the kind of place where neighbors waved at each other. Kids rode bikes after school, and the mailman knew your dog by name. My home, a modest 2-story with cream-colored siding and a tidy flower garden, had been our sanctuary for years. Every morning, I'd step onto the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise reflect off the freshly painted mailbox, feeling an odd sense of peace that only comes when your surroundings feel safe and familiar. I had built my life here carefully, everything balanced, everything in order. My spouse and I had invested countless hours tending to the garden, repainting fences, and repairing the small cracks in the driveway. Our children, now teenagers, played in the backyard, their laughter filling the air with the kind of joy that makes a home feel alive. On weekends, we hosted neighbors for barbecues, sharing stories and homemade desserts. It was the kind of place where routines created comfort, and comfort made you feel untouchable. But even in the most idyllic communities, power hides in the smallest details. Our HOA, led by Karen Miller, had a reputation for being meticulous, almost obsessively controlling. Karen, a woman in her early 50s with a sharp bob and an even sharper tongue, seemed to take personal pride in enforcing every guideline, down to the tiniest leaf that dared to fall outside her definition of order. She patrolled the neighborhood in her bright teal blazer, clipboard in hand, always appearing just when she was least expected. The residents joked nervously about her routine checks, though everyone understood there was nothing routine about them. There was an air of intimidation beneath the surface, a subtle reminder that while the streets were ours, the rules belonged to someone else. At first, it was all minor inconveniences. A polite note about a slightly overgrown hedge. A reminder to adjust the angle of our holiday decorations. Nothing worth worrying about. I complied, not because I feared retaliation, but because harmony in the neighborhood mattered to me. I liked being part of a community where respect and cooperation were currency. And in exchange, I could enjoy my life in peace. Yet, even then, I noticed the tiny signs that power could turn predatory. Karen had a way of watching from her porch without acknowledging your presence. A clipboard strategically held to suggest she was inspecting, when really, she was observing you, noting your every move. Her daughter, Chelsea, often tagged along, a young woman in her early 20s with a confident, defiant streak that mirrored her mother's intensity. Together, they were a team of observation and subtle intimidation. Always present, always judging, yet rarely revealing their true intentions until the moment it mattered most. That summer, I planned a 2-week getaway with my family, a rare escape from work, school, and routine. Everything was arranged. The house was locked. The garden watered automatically, and neighbors were informed to keep an eye out for any unusual activity. I left with a sense of calm, confident in the security of my home and the trust of the community. After all, who would dare cross the invisible line into someone's property while cameras and neighbors were around? It's strange how the smallest moments of confidence can be shattered in an instant. While I was packing, I noticed a faint unease that I dismissed as the usual pre-trip jitters. The sun glinted off the mailbox, the flowers swayed in the breeze, and everything appeared perfect. But beneath that perfection, tension was brewing, invisible yet tangible, like a storm forming on the horizon. The HOA had its eyes on me, and what seemed like a peaceful summer vacation was about to become a turning point. I couldn't have predicted by the time we drove away. Leaving the cul-de-sac behind, I felt the comfort of routine lull me into false security. I imagined returning to find the garden thriving, the mailbox intact, and my home exactly as I left it. I never considered the possibility that my sanctuary could be violated while I was away. I never imagined that the so-called routine inspections would escalate into a full-blown invasion of privacy. And yet, that's exactly what happened. Little did I know. Those 2 weeks would transform the neighborhood I loved into a stage for conflict, suspicion, and a lesson about power, control, and the lengths some people will go to enforce their version of order. What I assumed was a quiet, safe community was about to reveal its darker undercurrents, and my family, along with the entire street, would witness just how far the HOA was willing to push boundaries. The stage was set. The players were in place, and the conflict, silent and simmering until now, was about to erupt in ways no one expected. The first signs of trouble appeared almost immediately after I returned from vacation. I had been expecting the usual minor HOA notes, a polite reminder about overgrown hedges, perhaps a comment about a crooked mailbox. But what I found instead made my stomach drop. Strewn across the front yard were fluorescent orange warning notices, clipped to the fence, scattered along the walkway, and even pinned to the garage door. Each one carried a familiar crisp print: violation of HOA policies, immediate attention required. The words felt less like reminders and more like threats. I scanned the documents, my pulse quickening. One notice accused me of leaving my garden in a state of neglect. Another claimed my driveway had improperly parked vehicles. And a third, most alarming of all, insinuated that unauthorized individuals had been on my property, my own property, during my absence. As I read and reread each line, the realization hit me: they were escalating. The HOA, led by Karen Miller, wasn't satisfied with petty fines and inspections. They were targeting me personally, pushing boundaries far beyond reasonable oversight. Within hours, I began noticing subtle changes around the neighborhood. The moment I stepped outside, I felt the weight of eyes on me. Neighbors who had once greeted me warmly now offered cautious glances, whispering behind fences. Chelsea Miller, Karen's daughter, appeared at the end of my driveway more frequently, phone in hand, recording harmless interactions as if to document my supposed violations. Their intimidation tactics were deliberate, a clear message that I was under scrutiny, and any misstep would be seized upon. The next morning, the HOA left a final notice taped to my front door. This time, it was a hefty $500 fine, citing unauthorized entry and obstruction of HOA protocols. The accusation shocked me. Unauthorized entry. The notice didn't even hide its implication. They had entered my property while I was away, and now they were trying to frame me for something I hadn't done. I felt a knot tighten in my chest, a mixture of disbelief and anger. I knew I had to respond, but even as a homeowner, I was unsure how to confront such blatant overreach without giving them the upper hand. Determined to gather evidence, I began reviewing the footage from my home security cameras. What I saw made my blood run cold. Karen Miller, in her bright teal uniform, appeared in my backyard 2 days into my vacation, clipboard in hand. She moved deliberately, inspecting the flower beds, checking the gate locks, and pacing along the driveway. Chelsea followed, smirking as she recorded parts of the property on her phone. The footage confirmed it. The HOA had entered my property without permission. They were brazen, unashamed, and completely unafraid of being caught. With proof in hand, I contacted the HOA office, hoping reason would prevail. I explained the situation, calmly outlining the violation of my property rights. Their response was predictable. Karen's voice, sharp and dismissive, insisted it was standard protocol and that their presence had been routine inspection. I could feel my frustration mounting. Routine. Entering someone's yard without notice while they were away did not qualify as routine in any reasonable world. I left the call with no resolution, only more warnings that fines would increase if violations continued. In the following week, the harassment escalated. I began receiving daily notices, some posted physically on my property, others delivered via email, citing arbitrary infractions. One claimed my lawn ornaments violated the community aesthetic. Another accused me of obstructing neighborhood pathways, even though no one had ever approached my yard without my consent. Karen Miller's presence became almost omnipresent. I would see her walking past my house, clipboard held high, eyes scanning, as if she were waiting for me to make a single mistake. Chelsea often lingered nearby, camera ready. Her presence a constant reminder that every action I took was being judged. One evening, a particularly aggressive notice arrived, stamped with red letters, "Final warning before legal action." My heart sank as I read it. Legal action? They were threatening lawsuits and potential charges over trivialities I hadn't even committed. It was clear now that this wasn't about rules or community standards. It was about control, intimidation, and asserting power over me. The stress weighed heavily on my family. My spouse, usually calm, began questioning whether we had made a mistake moving into this neighborhood. Even the kids noticed the tension, avoiding their usual play in the backyard, sensing that something unseen was pressuring the household. The tension reached a boiling point when I decided to confront the situation head-on. I scheduled a meeting at the HOA office, prepared with evidence from the cameras and a detailed record of every notice, fine, and encounter over the past 2 weeks. As I entered the sterile meeting room, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. Karen Miller sat at the head of the table, clipboard in hand, her posture rigid, exuding the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Chelsea hovered at her side, phone ready, smirk firmly in place. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as if the room itself were anticipating the battle about to unfold. I presented the security footage, calmly but firmly outlining each instance of trespassing and harassment. Karen's initial expression of composure faltered when I played the video, revealing her in my backyard while I was away. Her eyes darted, lips tightened, and for a fleeting moment, her control wavered. Chelsea's smug confidence faded as she realized the evidence could no longer be ignored. The room, once dominated by their assumed authority, shifted. I could sense a subtle unease settling over them, the first crack in the facade of control they had maintained so ruthlessly. And yet, just as I thought the confrontation might end in my favor, Karen attempted a countermove. She argued that the footage was irrelevant, claiming technical errors, and insisted the HOA still had the right to issue fines and warnings. The tension spiked. I could feel the stakes rising with each word. The room seemed to shrink, pressure mounting as I considered my next move. One wrong reaction could tip the balance, potentially allowing them to maintain their campaign of harassment. The challenge was no longer just about proving they had entered my yard. It was about asserting my rights against an organization, determined to undermine me by the end of the meeting. It was clear this fight would not be resolved in a single encounter. The HOA's intimidation tactics were far from over, and their ability to manipulate rules and threaten legal action loomed over me like a storm cloud. But something had shifted. The footage had planted doubt, exposure had weakened their confidence, and I could sense that the next confrontation would not be ordinary. What happened next would determine whether the HOA could continue their campaign unchecked or finally face consequences for their overreach. The stage was set. The tension, once simmering beneath the surface, was now boiling. And the moment of truth, the turning point where justice, strategy, and confrontation collided, was just around the corner. The day of the final confrontation arrived like a storm on the horizon, charged, inevitable, and heavy with anticipation. I had spent countless hours preparing, reviewing every security camera clip, cataloging every notice, photographing every fine and arbitrary citation. and drafting a timeline that left no question about the HOA's overreach. But nothing could have fully prepared me for the tension I felt standing outside the HOA meeting hall, waiting for the board to convene. My hands were steady, but my heart pounded. This wasn't just a meeting. This was the moment where months of intimidation, harassment, and rule-bending would finally face a reckoning. The boardroom was cold, sterile, and intimidating. Karen Miller sat at the head of the long table, her clipboard already in hand, as though it were a shield and a weapon all at once. Chelsea, perched nearby, had her phone ready, smirking with the confidence of someone who believed she already held the upper hand. Other board members lingered silently, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Sensing that this meeting would not go the way Karen expected, I began calmly, presenting the evidence in chronological order. The footage of Karen and Chelsea entering my yard while I was away, the stack of notices and fines, and the documentation of their escalating harassment. Each piece of proof landed like a hammer strike, and I could see the subtle cracks forming in their composure. Karen's eyes flickered, her lips tightening as if she were calculating how to deflect. But the sequence of events was irrefutable. Even Chelsea's smirk faltered as she realized that the video evidence could no longer be denied. Then came the moment that shifted the entire room. I revealed footage that showed Karen physically moving items in my backyard, not for maintenance, but apparently to create the appearance of violation. She was caught red-handed, performing actions that went beyond inspection into deliberate interference. Gasps echoed quietly across the room. The board members, previously silent, exchanged glances. The scales of authority that Karen had wielded for months were tipping beneath her dot. Karen attempted to regain control, her voice rising with indignation. She insisted that her actions were part of routine inspections, that I was overreacting, and that I had somehow provoked the fines through negligence. But with every word she spoke, the evidence I presented dismantled her claims. I had time-stamped video, photos of my property before and after her intrusion, and written records of communication where she explicitly approved actions she now denied. Her arguments began to crumble under the weight of proof. Chelsea interjected, attempting to intimidate me with accusations that I had violated community rules in response to their actions. It was a desperate gambit, an attempt to shift the focus and regain the upper hand. But I was prepared. I calmly presented a side-by-side comparison of my property conditions, demonstrating that every accusation was baseless. I could see her confidence evaporate, replaced by panic and disbelief. The room, once dominated by their assumed authority, had changed. The power dynamic had shifted, and I felt the thrill of justice surging through me. As the tension mounted, I made the decisive move. I formally requested that the board acknowledge the HOA's unlawful entry, remove all fines, and issue a written apology. More than that, I demanded an official review of their protocols to prevent future abuse. Silence filled the room. Karen's face turned pale, and even the senior board members seemed shocked at the audacity, or perhaps the inevitability of the request. I could feel their unease. Their control was slipping like sand through fingers. Then came the moment no one expected. I had secretly contacted legal counsel prior to the meeting, anticipating that escalation would be necessary. As the board debated how to respond, my attorney appeared via video call, laying out the legal ramifications of trespassing and harassment. The room stiffened. Karen's mouth opened, closed, and then stammered, clearly grasping for a lifeline that didn't exist. Chelsea's phone recording suddenly seemed irrelevant in the face of the law. Every tactic of intimidation they had relied upon dissolved under the undeniable reality. Their actions could have legal consequences. Karen tried a final attempt at deflection, claiming technicalities and miscommunication, but it was too late. The board, sensing exposure and potential liability, began agreeing to remove fines. issue corrections, and acknowledge their errors. The relief and vindication coursing through me were immediate, but the victory wasn't just personal, it was public. I could feel the other neighbors, who had been quietly observing and whispering speculation, taking note of the reversal of power. For months, Karen had ruled with an iron fist, enforcing rules with intimidation. And now, in front of everyone, her authority was publicly dismantled. The climax of the confrontation reached its peak when Karen, realizing there was no further recourse, slumped in her chair. The bravado, the smirks, the threats gone. Her daughter Chelsea looked around, stunned and speechless, as I calmly summarized the evidence and the board's decisions. The humiliation was palpable, but it was earned. The HOA's reign of fear over my household had ended, and the lessons for those who would attempt such overreach were written in plain sight. Even as I left the boardroom victorious, I felt the emotional weight of the months of stress, uncertainty, and anxiety lift slightly, replaced by the empowering sense that standing firm in the face of intimidation could change the balance of power. I knew this wouldn't be forgotten, not by the HOA, not by the neighborhood, and certainly not by me. The confrontation had been intense, emotionally charged, and fraught with stakes. But it had proven one undeniable truth: preparation, evidence, and determination could challenge even the most brazen misuse of authority. The climax wasn't just about the removal of fines or the acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It was about the validation of my rights, the restoration of autonomy over my property, and the public exposure of power abused. Karen's reaction, the tension in the room, and the eventual capitulation created a moment of triumph so intense that even the surrounding community couldn't ignore it. It was a turning point that transformed months of harassment into a lesson on accountability, vigilance, and the limits of authority. And yet, even in victory, one thought lingered: how many other homeowners had faced similar abuse without proof, without cameras, without the courage to confront it? The answer was chilling, a reminder that while this battle was won, the struggle against overreach and control in communities like mine was far from over. The boardroom emptied, the cameras had captured the reversal, and the echoes of confrontation faded into silence. But the stage was set for the final act: reflection, consequence, and the enduring impact of standing up to an organization that thought it could act without accountability. The next chapter would reveal not just what happened to me, but how an HOA's missteps can ripple through an entire community, and how justice, when meticulously pursued, can triumph in even the most oppressive circumstances. After the storm of confrontation, the calm that followed felt surreal. The boardroom, once a place of tension and intimidation, had been transformed into a stage for accountability. Karen Miller, the figure who had wielded her authority like a weapon for months, had been publicly stripped of her assumed power. The removal of fines, the acknowledgement of trespassing, and the public correction of protocol had all been achieved. But the true victory extended far beyond paper and signatures. It was a moral triumph, the validation that standing firm, gathering evidence, and refusing to bow to fear could reclaim control over one's life, property, and dignity. In the immediate aftermath, the neighborhood began to shift. Word of the confrontation and the HOA's capitulation spread quickly, carried by whispers across fences, emails between neighbors, and social media posts from those who had quietly witnessed the ordeal. For the first time, the board, and particularly Karen and Chelsea, were seen not as untouchable arbiters of community rules, but as flawed humans whose overreach could be challenged. It was subtle at first: nods of acknowledgement from neighbors who had previously kept their distance, expressions of support from those who had endured minor infractions silently, and even private apologies from residents who had been too intimidated to speak up. The balance of power, which had felt rigid and unyielding, was beginning to democratize. Back at home, life slowly returned to normal, though the experience had left an indelible mark. I spent the first few days decompressing, walking through the yard and relishing the absence of scrutiny. The flower beds I had tended carefully before vacation were now entirely mine again, free from the prying eyes and interfering hands that had caused me so much stress. I could watch my children play in the backyard without constantly scanning for evidence of another intrusion. Even the mailbox, once the medium for a barrage of threats and fines, stood as a symbol of restored autonomy. In the quiet, I realized just how much the constant pressure had eroded our sense of security, and how deeply the victory had restored it. But the impact went beyond personal relief. The HOA, shaken by the exposure and the legal implications, was forced to implement systemic changes. Official policies were revised, ensuring that inspections would be scheduled in advance. That entry onto private property required explicit homeowner consent, and that fines could no longer be issued arbitrarily. Training sessions were mandated for board members on lawful property access and ethical conduct. These measures, though procedural on paper, represented a tangible safeguard against future abuse. I could see that my confrontation had set a precedent, a cautionary tale that would ripple through the HOA for years to come. Neighbors began to approach me with their own stories. Some shared experiences of subtle intimidation, fines for trivial infractions, surveillance of yards, or verbal warnings disguised as casual advice. Others had witnessed the more aggressive behavior, but had been too fearful to speak up. My experience became a catalyst for conversation and awareness, sparking discussions about property rights, personal boundaries, and the responsibilities of community boards. I realized that the struggle wasn't unique to me. It was systemic, and by standing firm, I had created space for others to do the same. The personal lessons were just as profound. I had underestimated the lengths to which some individuals would go to assert control when they believed no one was watching. I had assumed that civility, good faith, and compliance would protect me. Those assumptions were shattered. What replaced them was vigilance, preparation, and the understanding that knowledge of rights and the courage to assert them is a powerful deterrent against abuse. This newfound awareness didn't make me paranoid. It made me empowered. I could navigate my community with confidence, aware of both potential threats and the tools to address them. Even Karen and Chelsea experienced long-term consequences, though not legally punitive in the criminal sense. Their reputations were tarnished, their authority publicly questioned, and their social leverage within the neighborhood diminished. The same gestures of intimidation that had once commanded obedience now appeared petty, performative, and transparent. For the first time, their credibility was in doubt. Conversations that once deferred to Karen's judgment now involved measured skepticism, and Chelsea's presence, once an extension of intimidation, was now met with wary observation rather than awe or fear. The subtle but irreversible shift in perception highlighted a core truth: authority derived from fear is fragile, and transparency can dismantle it faster than confrontation alone. The HOA board, faced with scrutiny from both the community and outside legal advisors, began documenting procedures and maintaining records meticulously. This level of accountability, while initially met with resistance, ultimately benefited all homeowners. Residents who had previously felt powerless were now aware that the board's actions could be questioned and reviewed. Policies, once vague and open to interpretation, were now explicit, reducing arbitrary enforcement and fostering a more cooperative environment. My struggle had inadvertently strengthened the community framework, ensuring fairness while curbing abuse. On a personal level, the incident also reinforced the importance of resilience and composure in the face of intimidation. There were moments when frustration, anger, and fear threatened to cloud judgment, moments when reacting impulsively could have escalated the situation. By maintaining focus, collecting irrefutable evidence, and presenting facts calmly and strategically, I was able to transform the narrative from victimhood to agency. That lesson resonated far beyond the HOA conflict. It was a reminder that preparation, patience, and clarity can turn seemingly insurmountable challenges into manageable confrontations with tangible outcomes. Over time, the community began to heal. Tensions that had simmered under the surface dissipated as neighbors observed the new policies in action and saw the consequences of unchecked authority. Children played in yards without the same sense of surveillance. Neighbors greeted each other without subtle hesitation, and casual gatherings resumed. The sense of normalcy, once disrupted by fear and intimidation, gradually returned. But beneath that return to routine, a deeper understanding had taken root. The balance between authority and accountability is delicate, and vigilance is essential to maintain it. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, I realized that the resolution extended far beyond the physical removal of fines or the official acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It was about reclaiming dignity, asserting rights, and demonstrating that ethical boundaries matter even in small, seemingly controlled communities. The HOA's initial confidence had been built on the assumption that residents would acquiesce silently. By challenging that assumption, I not only protected my family and property, but also created a framework for others to assert their rights with confidence and clarity. The impact rippled outward in ways I hadn't anticipated. Conversations at neighborhood gatherings shifted from mundane pleasantries to discussions about fairness, ethics, and accountability. People shared their experiences, compared notes, and became more aware of how to protect themselves from similar overreach. A sense of empowerment spread quietly but persistently, transforming the neighborhood culture from passive compliance to informed participation. I had become, in a way, catalyst for transparency and fairness. A reminder that standing up for what's right can inspire collective vigilance and change. In the end, the story of my confrontation with the HOA wasn't just about me, my yard, or even the fines. It was about the principles of accountability, integrity, and courage in the face of arbitrary power. The neighborhood learned that rules exist to protect the community, not to enforce personal agendas. Karen and Chelsea's lesson was hard-earned and public. While my family and I gained far more than peace of mind, we gained clarity, resilience, and the knowledge that no one, no matter how bold, can overstep boundaries when evidence and persistence align. As life settled back into its rhythm, I often found myself walking through the yard, observing the flowers, the mailbox, the carefully mown lawn. Each element was a reminder of what had been defended and reclaimed. The confrontation, once a source of fear and frustration, had transformed into a testament to vigilance, preparation, and courage. The HOA would continue to exist, as it must, in any organized community. But its power was now bounded, checked by transparency, law, and the voices of those who refused to be intimidated. Ultimately, the greatest takeaway was clear. Standing up for your rights isn't just about winning a battle. It's about setting a precedent, inspiring others, and reshaping the culture of accountability. Every homeowner has the power to challenge overreach, to insist on fairness, and to demand respect. My story, with all its tension, conflict, and eventual triumph, serves as a reminder that vigilance, courage, and preparation can transform even the most oppressive circumstances into lessons of empowerment, not just for oneself, but for an entire community.